Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Crittenbrink, you and I have spoken several times about my concerns that the Biden administration has been consistently weak on China, and in particular weak in supporting Taiwan. One area we have discussed multiple times is this administration's continued prohibition on our Taiwanese allies from displaying symbols of their sovereignty on American soil. And you know the history of this policy. It was the Obama administration that first implemented the policy at the behest of the Chinese Communist Party. When President Trump became president, I spent 4 years battling the Trump administration, urging them to change the policy. And finally, at the end of the administration, I was successful. And the State Department changed the policy to allow Taiwan to do what all of our other allies can do, which is to appear on U.S. soil, to appear on U.S. government properties with Taiwanese flags, wearing Taiwanese military uniforms. When President Biden became president and he nominated Tony Blinken to be Secretary of State, I asked Mr. Blinken about this question before this committee. And Secretary Blinken committed at the time to keep the policy in place, quote, for the time being. It turned out that phrase for the time being meant just enough time for him to get confirmed and get in office, because shortly after he got there, he reversed the policy. He returned to the same appeasement of the Chinese Communist Party that had prevailed under the Obama administration. And I have to say it occurred at a particularly bad time when China is engaging in more and more aggressive and bellicose actions towards Taiwan. Now, at your confirmation hearing, I asked you about this. And you committed to this committee, and I quote, you said, quote, "I am committed in every way to growing our partnership in Taiwan." Now, every way presumably includes allowing the Taiwanese to display their flags, their uniforms, their symbols of sovereignty. Has the State Department done so, and if not, why?
Senator Cruz, thank you for your question. Respectfully, I would say, Senator, that the U.S. government's policy related to symbols of sovereignty, that policy and those restrictions have been in place since the very beginning of the implementation of our One China policy and our unofficial partnership.
With respect, that's not true, because the Trump State Department reversed them and allowed Taiwan to display the symbols of sovereignty.
But Senator, these were not new policies that came about in the Obama administration. These are restrictions that from the very beginning.
Is it true the Trump administration reversed the policy?
It is true that near the end of the Trump administration, the contact guidelines that have traditionally guided U.S. government interaction with Taiwan were rescinded.
So the policy was they could display their symbols of sovereignty, and then the Biden administration came in and acquiesced once again to the Chinese communists. And I would point out this view is not an esoteric view. I have not once but twice introduced legislation to allow the Taiwanese to display their symbols of sovereignty, and this committee has passed that legislation with an overwhelming bipartisan vote multiple times. So if you have Democrats and Republicans on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee telling the State Department, respect the Taiwanese and treat them as allies, why does the Biden State Department refuse to follow that guidance?
Senator, since 1979, we have not had formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Taiwan is an important but unofficial partner with whom we have an incredibly robust relationship. I would argue.
All right. Let me ask a different question.
Senator, if I could just.
I want to ask another aspect.
I would argue,
my time
Senator,
is running out.
that our partnership with Taiwan has never been stronger. We have.
All right. Well, let me give another example then, Mr. Crittenbrink.
Yes, sir.
Another area where I am very concerned concerns Taiwan's participation in the International Civil Aviation Organization. Last Congress, I authored legislation which became law with bipartisan support requiring the administration to formulate and transmit a strategy for securing Taiwan's inclusion in ICAO. We saw, particularly during the COVID pandemic, with the incredible number of flights going through Taiwan, that it was asinine not to include discussions with Taiwan. It should be a no-brainer. Taiwan is a global hub for civil aviation. Well, the State Department recently transmitted that report. I have it in my hand here. Without being unkind, it doesn't approach remotely the urgency of the urgency of the issue that the legislation required. So I want to ask you, what is State Department's specific, concrete, strategic plan to secure Taiwan's participation in the International Civil Aviation Organization?
Senator, we agree with you that Taiwan ought to participate meaningfully, not just in ICAO, but in many other international institutions, given Taiwan's important role in global affairs and global economy. I'll have to take back your question on our specific strategy for doing so, but I hope our position is clear. And just one.
So by statute, it should have been in this report, and it's not.
I'm happy to take that back and take a look at that, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.